believe now. He has written very extensively in several issues of the Farm's Review of Books, analyzing and shoring up and summing up the scholarship and the psychology with which Fawn Brody wrote her biography about Joseph Smith, and he finds her falling far short. Now, he took the cue from none other than Hugh Nibley. Hugh Nibley, in his book, No Ma'am, That's Not History, is kind of a smart-aleck little response, although he very effectively summarized the main weaknesses of Fawn Brody, which she never overcame, and which most people who read the book don't realize are there. Nibley got it on. And Lou Midgley has extensively analyzed the details of part of Nibley's critique, and then, of course, Midgley has his own range of knowledge and interpretation and ideas, and he just flattens Fawn Brody out. It is quite the research. He's written hundreds of pages on this Fawn Brody phenomenon, basically decimating it and putting it to rest. He's done a fine job. I'd recommend you read any of his materials in the Farm's Review of Books. So what Nibley does in his opening chapter in this book, Abraham in Egypt, the Book of Abraham and the Book of the Dead. The issue, as the scholars have seen it, is the opening of the Book of Abraham. I, Abraham. Now, this is how the Book of Abraham begins. So, of course, this is an autobiography. I mean, this is an account written by Abraham. And he says critics laugh with glee about this because they say this writing isn't that old. There's no way Abraham could have written it himself. The papyri don't even date back that far. So obviously, Joseph Smith is lying. But Nibley, through an analysis of the first few pages, shows that the words I, Abraham, having written this account upon papyrus with my own hand, this is a formal way of expressing the manner in which the document records aspects of Abraham's life. It is a literary technique, and he shows several places in other Egyptian writings as well as other Jewish writings where the idea of writing by your own hand is not that he himself personally wrote on this particular papyri that we have now in the church that was given back to us in 1967, but that he commissioned the writing. He was in charge of it being produced. And what we have could very well be copies of copies of copies, but that doesn't do away with the fact that the original version was authorized by Abraham. And that's basically the first summary of the first several pages in Nibley's book. His scholarly analysis of this is very interesting because what I did is I went and got several of these sources where he shows in ancient times other people commissioned either writings to be written about them, or else they commissioned the building of a building or the carving of a stela. Not that they themselves did it, but that they were in charge of the situation, and so they get the credit. But they also write, I, whoever in ancient Egyptian history, I built this building. When in fact he never did any of the stone carving, he never did any of the cement work, he didn't do anything. He simply supervised it. So this is a literary technique. What is fascinating, however, on page 3, I'm going to skip back to page 3 and 4, the idea of Abraham writing an autobiography. Now, there's been other ancient literatures come out about the patriarch Abraham. The main ones, namely the Apocalypse of Abraham and the Testament of Abraham, that also are written as an autobiography of Abraham. Now, this autobiographical aspect of Abraham is not in the Bible. This particular technique, the question becomes, would or could Abraham really have written about his own life, his own autobiography? Could he really have been through what he says he was through in the Book of Abraham? Now that the other ancient literatures are coming about, which weren't discovered until the later 1800s after Joseph Smith was dead for a few decades, we find that, the idea of an autobiography is very credible, very plausible. This is what Hugh Nibley is establishing in the beginning of the Abraham in Egypt. Now, Nibley explores another severe criticism, which the critics have said is the argument of arguments against the authenticity of the book of Abraham, of course. Here's their argument in a nutshell. This is on page 7, 8, 9, and 10. Yeah, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. They argue, the critics that is, they say, look, the book of Abraham is supposedly based on this papyri here that the church has since 1967, that Joseph Smith acquired way back from Chandler in 1830s, 1835, 36. Well, the problem with this is we have Egyptologists who are translating this papyri right now, and it's nothing but common funerary documents. It's the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Now, to be sure, there are chapters of the Egyptian Book of the Dead in the Joseph Smith papyri. Not all of it is the Egyptian Book of the Dead, though. Some of it is the Book of Breathings. So there's different types of the ancient Egyptian literatures represented in the papyri. But if it's just a common funerary documents, as if any of the common funerary documents are common. See, this idea, this little word common, is supposed to refute everything, and yet is anything common? You know, it's like looking at the pyramids and saying, oh, well, yeah, they're just common pyramids. Is anything about Egypt common at all? That's not an argument at all, in other words. Criminy. And then he notes how Theodore de Villers in the 1850s, and then other critics in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and the 1980s. In other words, ever since we've had the papyri, they always say this idea that this is just the Egyptian Book of the Dead. This is the definitive argument against any kind of authenticity with the Book of Abraham. Well, the interesting thing is, new recent scholarly and archaeological discoveries have completely taken away this criticism. Now, Nibley is not proving the Book of Abraham authentic with this. So many people misunderstand his apologetic. Nibley didn't approach the scriptures in an effort to prove them. In all of my readings of all of his dozens of books and hundreds of articles, he never once ever established the idea that I am going to prove this to you. That wasn't his method. His method is, I'm going to show how criticisms against the scriptures of the Latter-day Saints are invalid, and therefore we have to look at something else. This was Nibley's method. And so it's very interesting how he utilized archaeology and history and logic and so on and so forth, and vast amounts of research to show that we're not here to prove the scriptures. We're here to show that so many of the criticisms against Joseph Smith in the scriptures are wrong. Now, that's a very fascinating approach to take, isn't it? The problem with this for us everyday common ordinary Joe Mormons are that we haven't taken the time, or we're not overly familiar with all of the different criticisms about our scriptures. This, again, is one of the reasons why perhaps Hugh Nibley's writings are somewhat difficult, because the assumption he is bringing to the table is that we are already familiar with many of the criticisms and arguments against us, and so therefore here are some ways that these arguments are refuted. The interesting thing about Nibley's materials is not only do these materials refute the critics' arguments, but they end up supporting Joseph Smith. It's a fascinating methodology. You know, another problem is so many of us just don't bother. We don't want to take the time to read this kind of crap, this anti-Mormon crap. I probably shouldn't call it that, huh? I probably should, we can't help it.